Hi, this presentation is titled Webform. There's this for that. First, let me introduce myself. Hello, my name is Jacob Rockowitz. I'm known as Jay Rockowitz on the web. I'm a Drupal developer and software architect. I built and maintain the Webform module for Drupal 8. So, before I start this presentation, I have this slide here. This is not about, and this is really for me to set some context here of what I don't want to go into in this presentation, which is the history of the Webform module, installing it, alternatives. I'm not going into the future, next steps, or the roadmap. Staying away from theming and kind of barely touching managing submissions. What this presentation is about is building awesome forms. That's the goal of the Webform module for Drupal 8, to empower you to build any type of form you want and to collect any type of data you want. And it comes down to this question: how do you build forms in Drupal? Well, there's the Webform module for that. The Webform module is a powerful and flexible open source form builder and submission manager for Drupal 8. This is kind of how I describe things. It provides all the features expected from an enterprise proprietary form builder combined with the flexibility and openness of Drupal. And just to also set some context, this is a web form. Very simple form. It's a contact form. And this is the backend UI, the web form builder to manage that form. You can see those inputs are right there: email, text field for message. And you can also, there's this feature, you can edit the source behind a web form, and this is the source editor. And ultimately, once you hit submit, you're going to collect a submission. And that's what we're seeing is the data coming through with test data. Now, the use case for the Webform module is, to build a form or copy a template, publish the form as a page note or blog, collect form submissions, send confirmations and notifications. Once you get those into Drupal, you might review these results online, and then you would distribute or download these results as a CSV, or you put it in a remote post to a CRM or a third-party service. And the use cases really kind of breaks down to these three steps: is you're building a form, you're collecting submissions, and then you're distributing the data. And I'd like to give you a quick elevator pitch demo of the Webform module, kind of walking through these steps. I have a clean install here. I'm going to use the contact form that I just showed you. Very simple form. For the demo, what I like to do is just add an element, and I'm going to go with adding a text field. I'm going to call it company. So we're going to add a company to this contact form. I'm not going to go through every element here. I'm going to hit save. Have the company field. We can preview it. And you can see company. Now there's a little mistake. It should say your company. It should be required. It should be at the top. So I'm going to go make this change here. Now you could do it in the UI, but what I like to do is show people the source mode. So we go down, you can grab the input, cut it, scroll up to the top, paste it right here, change the label, copy the required. Let's see, we'll copy the required from here, and we've successfully moved the element. And now I'm going to go to the test tab, which will let us see our changes. You see your company is now at the top and it's required. And the test tab, it automatically fills out the form with just like reasonable Latin text default data that you have full control over. Hit send, and now we've generated a submission. I'm going to click back, and what I'd like to do just to get a little more advanced, well, let's go through this step. Here's the submission that came through. We can look at it, we can preview it, and this stuff we're not going to go any further into this in the presentation, but here's that submission. You can look at it as a table for very long forms. It makes it a little easier. You can also add notes to the submission. You can resend the submission, and that gives you the ability just to resend the email and also preview your emails that are going out. And jumping up to the results tab, you can also customize these results by just clicking customize, and you can pick what columns you want visible. That's pretty much it. Submissions are very, very simple, and there's a download tab that you can download everything into a CSV. The only other thing in the elevator pitch which I like to show is just the level of customability that's available. Now, we have this very simple one-column form. I'm just going to show you multi-column layout because I think it gives you a better idea of what's possible. So Webform is using Flexbox. I'm going to add a Flexbox layout. I don't have to do anything other than insert it. I'm going to move it to the top, and I'm going to put your name and company right next to each other. I'm going to hit save. To even further this, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a horizontal rule just to kind of show you some of the styling capabilities. And keep in mind, what we're looking at is just out-of-the-box styles. So you can add classes. So we could pick and say we want a very fancy, let's see, we want a solid. And let's see, we can go down and we could have it flared. Actually, let's just do a flare, a glyph horizontal rule, and we'll hit save. Scroll down. Sorry, this got lost. Using a very small screen here, so it makes it a little harder, but now there's the horizontal rule. I'm moving it up. And if I hit view, 2-column layout with this little horizontal rule. And you can keep going with layers and layers of adding different styles to your element and containers and look and feel. You have full control over these forms. So let's keep going. So how do you discover what the Webform module can do? Well, there are examples for that, and that's what I was kind of giving you as an example of how to build a form, but the Webform module provides examples and demos that can be used as a starting point for building forms and applications. And there's examples and demos of every element type, multi-step forms, conditional logic, flexbox layout, which I just showed you. And then there's these demos of building an event registration system or an application evaluation system. And those demos just show you how you can have multiple forms working together using blocks and nodes to build rich applications where you're building an event and then you're attaching a registration form to that and you're collecting data about that specific event. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So the example style guide is very helpful and completely customizable. It's a great starting point for you to know what's going on, but when you hand off the site for a designer to look at and see how forms are working, you can use the style guide as that starting point and give it to them to look over, tweak things, understand what's being built, what they can, customize the styles, what classes are being used, and you can learn by example. And a very simple demo of this is the example module is installed. And I'm going to go over to the style guide because I think that's the key thing we want to look at. And the style guide just shows you every single element available, and you can scroll down, you start seeing the different behaviors with help tips, all the different variants of date pickers, telephone numbers, advanced telephone numbers. It's a lot to go through. You take your time, you walk through these things. All the variants of file uploads, table selection, there's even a cute kitty picker, signature element, rating element, toggles, Likert. Entity references are also available in the Webform module. And then there's composites, and we'll get into those a little bit, but you're seeing some composites in action. And this is very helpful for your designers because it just shows the styling of a form element, prefix, suffix, description, whether, input masks, how they're going to work, the tooltips. There's also this, let's see if I can get the inline tooltip. And then there's some containers. All the horizontal rules are available for you to tweak. You can add your own classes to do horizontal rules. And finally, at the bottom, we're going to just see all the available inline messages, which are dismissible, where you can just click the X and close them. And a little quick view of the flexbox layout. Let's scroll up to the top. Sorry, that's a little quick. And the examples, the other one I'll just show you is there's just an example of all the way at the bottom of multi-step form, which you can use to just get familiar with it and see how it's working, look at how the settings are configured, how we're doing these different labels, changing the buttons. Just a good starting point to get familiar with things. So how do you start building forms? Well, there are templates for that. And templates are forms that can be copied to create new forms. So templates are reusable forms. You create a form, you tag it as a template, and a form created from a template is a copy, it's a duplicate. It goes off and has a total life of its own. So changing or deleting a template does not change any existing forms. Just a starting point. It's like copying, but there's a UI for it and makes it a little easier. And this is a web form template. It's a feedback form. I'm going to actually show it to you. So if I go over, there's this tab called templates, and there's the feedback form, and you can preview it, look at it, and if you like it, you can hit select, and you can change the title or use the existing title. I'm going to just use this, click save, and I've got a feedback form on my site, and I can give you a view of it, and it's all ready for us to play with. I'm going to go back over to the build tab. That's it for templates. They're very simple, and there's just a checkbox, and you can check it off and take any form you have and make it into a template. So moving on, how do you build awesome forms, which is my big goal here. And there are elements for that, and that's kind of the key thing behind web form. Now, a form is a collection of elements, which includes inputs, composites, containers, pages, and pages that are used to collect a submission. And this is kind of the anatomy of a form. So we're talking anything's an element. Anything displayed on a form or in a page in Drupal is considered an element. And an input is an element that collects a value. And composites are a collection of inputs used to collect a group of values. The best example would be having like an address element. That's a composite because it has an address, city, state, street, zip, whatever information you want. And then containers are just things that hold elements. A very simple example would be a field set. Or moving on is you can have multi-step wizards. Each page is a container that is broken down into individual steps when you're building a wizard form. So there are many different types of elements. This is the breakdown of the UI and the categorization of all the elements available. And kind of give you the anatomy of a form element. There's a definition, the name, the cardinality, the default value, and then you can customize every single label, so the title, description, the help text, and even more text. And then you can get into the display of that element input. If it's a text field, you might have a prefix, suffix, you set the size, an input mask, and then when someone's submitting the form, you can validate it. And the most common one is required, but there's some others, including unique and you can do a regex on it, or a counter for text fields. You can do a character count or a word count. And then there are conditions, conditional logic to hide, show, or require or disable an element. And then for very complex applications, you can do full access controls of all your elements and decide who, what roles, users, or permission can access a specific element. And finally, there's advanced settings where you can really add custom attributes to any element. That's generally used for tracking, or you're doing, you want to have certain behaviors happen, and you can add your own attributes and tweak it that way. This is a web form element. This is a dialog of it. It's also available in a sidebar, which is what we're going to do, look at it that way. And this is the conditional logic, where you can set visible or required. And these are some of the advanced settings. And a lot of the advanced settings help you with also setting custom attributes to look and feel of an element, so you can change the style of it. Types of inputs, just to break it down, we're familiar with text fields. Options are just like select menus, radios, checkboxes, buttons, images, file uploads, and then I'm calling widgets anything that's kind of like a advanced input, like a ratings or a signature. And finally, there's entity references that you want to pay attention to. Containers, we talked about field sets. Section is just about putting a header and grouping a bunch of elements together. Details are just those collapsible elements to hide and show things, and flexbox is used for multi-column layouts. So composite elements, we talked about address, but Likert is one of the first ones. That's a way to do surveys and questions. The other composites that are available are location information like address, contact. You can do links with URLs. You can have just a name if you're collecting names. I don't know, if you're doing like an airline registration form where you need to get the name of the passengers. You can use a name composite. You can also build your own custom composites. And we're not going to get into that, but it's good to know that it's available to you. And don't forget that you can preview all the available elements. This is a really important feature that I want to demo. I want you to get comfortable with it. We're in the feedback form, the pretty basic form. Let's add an element. So here's a preview. So this is the preview is not on by default because it does require some bandwidth to show every input. But you can see, you can scroll through and get examples of all the inputs as you're getting familiar with things. Actually, for this demo, I'm going to do a signature. I'm going to hit add element, and you could see all the different settings available. One of the demos that I like to do, I'm going to just add this signature. Nope, I forgot to do it. Signature. Okay, I'm going to hit save. And this adds a signature element to the bottom. We'll keep that around. Not always someone's going to sign a feedback form, but what I do recommend doing, which is just a nice thing to do, is explore text field. So we'll create a text field, and sometimes I just name them exactly what they are, text field. We'll delete this after I'm done, but the idea is you could just go in and say, this is help text. This is a description. So more. This is more text. If you wanted to say prefix, you could just say prefix, suffix. I think you start getting the idea that you could fill in things and get familiar with all the features available. They all work well together. We're not going to do input mask, but could go down, not disable or read only, but we could do a word count, character count. Let's just set it to 100. You can do custom messages for everything. This is important. So if you do required validation, you can say what you want the message to be. And these help bubbles help you kind of see that. I'm going to hit save. There's our text field, which I misspelled. That's okay. But you could see this really advanced. I don't recommend doing every one of these settings at once, but it helps to understand what they are. And if we go back to build, we can easily go in and delete it. Okay, so we're going to keep going. So how do you send emails and push data to a CRM? Well, there's a handler for that. And handlers are used to route submitted data to applications and send email notifications. And we're now at the phase where we've built a great form and now we want to do something with the data. And handlers, the most common thing is to send an email. So you can send email, a notification or confirmation email. You can push the data to a CRM using a remote post. If you install something like the Webform MailChimp module, you can subscribe people to mailing lists. And there's some handlers to help you kind of flag a submission based on a submitted value, kind of using conditional logic. And you can even go in, based on conditional logic, change the confirmation message that you're going to display an end user. And these are kind of the handlers that provide this functionality. Email being the most common one. There's also a scheduled email handler, which just allows you to schedule when an email is going out. It's very useful for events so that you could send a reminder a day before the event. Or if someone didn't fill out a form, you can send a reminder. If they've saved a draft and haven't completed it, you can send a reminder a month after they left the draft sitting there. Remote post is just about pushing data to really CRMs is the most common use case, or just like a REST API. Actions and settings are to trigger conditional behaviors on a submission or web form based on data coming in. And there's always a debug handler. There's a dedicated debug handler, and every handler I build has a debug checkbox to kind of look at what's going on under the hood. And I can give you a demo of the email remote posts. And this form is actually pretty good. I'm going to take out the signature just so I don't have to think about it. But let's go over and look at the settings. We're going to go over to handlers, and we have two. We have a confirmation and notification. Something I'm not getting into, but I like to show it. So we're sending a confirmation. If you have, it's the notification. Confirmation goes to the end user who submitted the form, but notification, you can do routing based on the type of feedback, which is an options element. Those are the radio buttons, and right now it's going to all the site mail, but you can enter it into, send email to comment@example.com, bug at example, here we'll do it, bug@example.com. This is a very quick way to build. Sorry, my typing's off, but I think you get the idea. You can also do conditional logic around these emails and have certain emails sent based on conditions of the form. Every single aspect of an email is customizable. Send to, from, name, BCC, what fields, elements. If you go into advanced, you also can decide at what state in the submission process. Most people send things when they're completed, but you can send an email when a submission's deleted or if a draft is saved. And you can also change some of the header settings to prevent spam. And this is the debug setting, which will just show you the email on screen. For this demo, what I really want to show you is the remote post handler. If I go over, you can see the remote post handler. It actually has a sample URL that we're going to use. And what this does is push the submission data. You can add custom data, including API keys. If we scroll down, you can check off. Now, by default, it only sends the elements. The 4 elements that we're getting data from is going to be pushed over to the CRM. I'm going to go over to Advanced. You can also add custom data to every post and options to the guzzle. It's guzzle options to the header of this post, so you can add API keys that way. But the key thing I need to do is hit debug. So if I go over to debug, we have it enabled. We go over to our test tab. Forms filled out. I'm going to hit submit. And we got an error because it was a non-existent server. It's mycrm.com. But what this does is it shows you the data going out, the status code coming in, exactly what message is being returned from CloudFront, which obviously they're not happy with us. But this hopefully gives you an idea of how you can start integrating your web forms into your third-party applications. I'm going to go right back to the main page and keep going. So how do you tweak and adjust the behavior or look and feel of your web forms? Well, there are settings for that. Now, the web form module ships with reasonable default settings, but everything is customizable. It's very important that you don't have to start configuring everything when you first install the web form module. In most cases, you can just start playing with it and building forms and getting familiar with it. And as you run into issues, you can tweak the settings. It's not issues, it's I need to change this label and I want to have the ability to do that. And this is the breakdown. This is very important in terms of getting familiar with the web form module, is understanding kind of the hierarchy of a form, which is these settings. That's how it's broken down, where you have your general information, which is your title of your form. And then you are building forms, so you have your form settings associated with that, which I'll get into in a sec. And then your form generates a submission. That submission sends a confirmation. It displays a confirmation message, but then you might send emails or handle that submission. And finally, the last two sections are really, you can inject custom CSS and JavaScript into a form to kind of make minor tweaks, and then you have access controls. But you should walk through these from left to right and get familiar with them. And this is a quick overview, where in general settings you can disable the saving of results and have no data go to Drupal. That's in general settings you can convert a web form to a template, customize the URLs, turn on Ajax, and third-party settings generally go into the general settings tab. So if you want to do spam protection like honeypot or antibot, you'll get your third-party settings there. And form behaviors, this is where you can control when the form is open, close. Every message is customizable. You can configure it to pre-populate based on query string parameters. If you have multi-step, you get access to all the labels and the behaviors of the multi-step form, including the progress bar. And you can enable previewing, make it required or optional. With submissions, it's more about the labels and error messages that you're going to see. You can set limits based on the form, the user, the entity it's associated with. You can enable saving of drafts. Submission purging is very helpful if a lot of people are saving drafts, so at a certain point you can remove those drafts. And autofill is just a way to pre-populate the form based on a previous submission. And confirmation, we're all familiar with that. You submit a form, you get a confirmation, and basically every type of confirmation is available. A dedicated page, an inline message, a status message, a modal confirmation. If you're doing Ajax-based forms, you might want to pop up a modal dialog, and you can even redirect to internal, external URLs. And with the JavaScript, the CSS and JavaScript, basically you can inject custom CSS and JavaScript into a form to make minor tweaks. That's generally the recommendation. If you have advanced client-side validation or conditional logic, you can use the JavaScript for that. And access controls is just, basically the web form has full access controls to the form level, who can access the form, like view, update, purge, submissions, own, update, everything, test, and elements kind of have those same access controls available to them. And I can just kind of quickly click through and walk you through some of these. It's hard. You really need to spend some time walking through it. You don't have to do anything immediately, but you're starting to see the behaviors. This expand all makes your life a little easier because you can collapse everything. There's an open and close. I think the one section I like to show you is form behaviors, where you can kind of control, check these boxes, and it's like little nuances to a form. Display a reset button. Prevent someone from clicking the submit button twice. If you have multi-step, you can disable the back, disable client-side validation. If you're using the inline form error module, you can disable it for a specific form, or you can display a required indicator. But you start to see all the behaviors, and this is the pre-populate. And now you start seeing that pattern, a lot of labels available to you. And this is where you can add custom properties to the form, like tags and analytics. Submissions, very similar things you're going to see, all the labels, the submission numbering. You can also, when it's access denied, redirect to the login page. There's some behaviors available. Submission limits per user, per entity, purging. I think you're starting to see the pattern. And confirmation, this is one of the simpler settings forms because it's just like you've got 6 types of confirmation. You can then tweak them and display a custom message. Email handlers we went through. CSS and JavaScript is just adding CSS and JavaScript to your form. And access, it's a lot. I just want to emphasize you generally don't need this unless you're building a rich application, because all you want to do is have people create web form submissions, and generally you have a few people administering, and you can go in and add them as administrators right here. I'm going to keep going because it's a lot to digest. And I think the takeaway here is, should you customize everything? Should you customize nothing? Well, tips for just managing settings and behaviors is know what's possible and impossible. And keep it simple, stupid. Like, don't go crazy. Start off simple, make it more complex as you need. For developers, there's these two nuances where you can write your own hooks and define default settings that are applied to all your web forms using, hook, web form, create. Templates can define default settings. That's a nice way to kind of set someone up with a perfect form that's exactly meets your needs, including like just setting up the email handlers to go to the right email addresses or have the right header settings. Now, we're getting into, so we only talked about settings for a web form, and it's how can you change global and default settings? Well, there's a configuration for that. And configuration defines the default features and functionality behaviors available to all web forms. So that's really the distinguishing thing. Settings are for web forms, configuration is for your entire site, all forms. And now we're getting into, these are things that should always be configured. File upload access. As a rule, you should always have private file access enabled for web forms and never accept public files from anonymous users. There's some security risks there, and they're even documented in the UI. Always install spam protection. I generally recommend Honeypot, and CAPTCHA is very good. And there's a lot of elements available, and you're starting to see that. It is a little overwhelming. So you should look at the elements that are available and turn off the ones you don't need. If you do not need file uploads on your site, turn them off, uncheck it. And API keys are very important if you're using like the location element, which integrates with Google Maps. And you should look at reusable options, and those are used for select menus to give you just like shared options to all your forms. And once you see it, you'll totally understand it. And once again, this whole concept that there's a hierarchy when you go into configuration. And you start seeing it. It's left to right, top to bottom. You're building, I'm going to just do this like rhythm of walking through it. You're building forms that contain elements. Some elements have options. Once someone hits submit, you're generating a submission that's handled, and that data can be exported. And then the last two are kind of the funny things that float at the end, which is there's libraries that are the web form module needs, and you can also tweak some advanced settings. And I'm just going to do a demo of just managing elements, options, and libraries, because I think these are the three big things. The way you get to configuration is you go up to the top, click configuration. And there's a lot of tabs here. I'm on a very small screen because I have the advanced tab and the images tab. I'm going to go over to elements, scroll down, and at the very bottom you can turn on and off which elements you don't want. And for example, by default, the web form module ships with the password element off because data is not stored as encrypted values. Now if you check it, it warns you. Now certain applications you might need a password. If you're pushing it to a third party, data is never stored, so the third, like the remote postage you're making, will be responsible for the encryption. But you should go through here and turn off the elements you don't need. And walk through all the settings. And there's my API key for the Google Map API. And what else I want to do is show you options. So options are just like days of the week, a list of them. The one, like the example would be we all use country codes. So you can go in. And this is actually being pulled, I think, from, yep, it's giving you a warning. This list is being pulled from Drupal. You can go customize it and reorder and create your own. And that's totally fine. And there's also, you can edit the source, which is a very quick way to get this data into Drupal. Going back up, the final thing, there's also images. So if you use the image select, there are reusable images. I just think the kitties are very, very cute. Sorry to go into that direction. Now, libraries. This is where you can define, there's some help here on how to get your libraries installed. There's a couple of drush commands. There are a lot of libraries to kind of do all these enhancements, but we're getting off the island and relying on these third parties. You can add custom CSS and JavaScript to every form. Generally, I recommend doing it at the theme layer, but it is available. And these are the libraries that you can turn on and off. For example, one great example is the web form module ships with select to, which is to help make multiple select elements work well. You can turn that off and choose the chosen library instead. It's an alternative to select to. You get all those settings. I'm going to keep going. So there's a configuration for that. That's your big takeaway here. Everything and anything is available to you. But what if you can't configure something via the user interface? Well, There's a module, hook, or template for that. It's just a Drupal thing. You can get in there and tweak almost any aspect of a web form. It's hook, form, alter in most cases. If you're tweaking a submission, it's hook, web form submission, save, insert, delete. They're entities, so you're getting into the entity hooks. And now we're kind of moving. We've talked about configuring it. You've got your forms, they're working. How do you place a web form on your site? Well, there are web form blocks for that. Now, people are familiar with blocks. Web form blocks are blocks that display a web form. Blocks are just things that can be placed on your site. They make it easy to include a web form within layouts and panels. They allow a web form to be placed just anywhere on the page, and allow a web form to be attached to any page on the site, which is a little interesting. You can put it anywhere on the site, like top, bottom, left, right, or on any page using blocks, which is kind of a nice feature. And this is the block admin UI. And I'm going to give you a very quick, sorry to jump ahead, demo of placing a block. So I'm going to go to the block layout. I'm going to go to the sidebar second. I'm going to use our feedback form. Well, actually, I use our contact form. Oops, sorry. I jumped the gun because now we got to go web form, place the block, select contact, it's selected, scroll down. You can control all the visibility settings and where it's going to be placed. You can also add default data, pass it into the web form when it's rendered on the right hand side. So now we're going to hit add it in, hit save, and what's going to start happening, this is where we get into some fun stuff. It's been added to every page on the site, our very pretty form. Now if I go up to home, here's a form. I'm going to submit it from the home page. I have some demo events. Let's go to one of those demo events. Submitting, by the way, keep track of I'm submitting at a bunch of different places on the site, right? Submitted 3 different places. I submitted it once before. Let's go to event 1 and do one more submission because this really reinforces a few things. Okay. Because I have quick edit links on, I can get in here. That's the block. That's the form. If I go over to the results tab, you're going to start to see the submitted to column is tracking where the web form is coming from. So what kind of just happened here is that contact form almost turned into a site feedback form because I know that someone filled it out when they were looking at demo event 1. It's almost like you could turn it into a comment system. Don't recommend it, but you start to get the idea to how comments track what node you're putting comments onto. So keep this in the back of your mind because we're going to move on and get into some other really interesting nuances of this feature. So how do you fully integrate a web form into your site? Well, there are web form nodes for that. And web form nodes are nodes with a web form field entity reference attached. And the web form node module, you turn it on, it provides a web form content type, but any content type can have a web form. You would just add the field to it. It tracks node-specific submissions, so it starts tracking which node you're submitting to. When you turn this on, you get a test tab and a results tab for any node that has a web form associated with it. And there's a references tab that gets added to all your web forms to make it even easier to track all the node instances and to quickly add web form nodes to your site. And the web form field can be added any content entity. It should almost say any content entity. That means paragraphs. Paragraphs does fully support web forms, and you can just add it into your paragraph layout. And just some quick tips and tricks for web form fields and nodes. Once you add a web form to a node, you get a relationship. And that relationship is available using tokens, and this is the web form submission node token, where you can have a token grab data from your node and pass it into your web form. If you have an event, you might want to pass some event dates. You could even have, this kind of interesting example where each web form node could have a confirmation message field, and you could use this token to change the confirmation for one web form that's being shared on multiple nodes. And I didn't get into computed elements, but they're really useful for kind of displaying values on a form. And you can quickly pull tokens, and you can even have Twig support, so you can have conditional logic for how computed elements working. And tokens are just so flexible and important. You can basically grab any piece of data related to your web form and display it, and including formatting values in different ways. So we're going to really just talk about Webform nodes for a quick second. So we're on our contact form, right? Yep, contact. There's this references tab. So what happens is it detects which content types support nodes, web forms, which nodes support web forms. I'm going to quickly hit add web form, and it's going to automatically pass the data in up here, and you're going to see I grabbed the title of the form, I pre-populated it. You can also pass submission data. You can also schedule when this form is available. Everything was pre-filled out, so I literally just have to click save, and you're going to see that we get the test tab. For this demo, what I do like to do is, since we're using the same form here, I'm going to just remove this block. It just makes it a little cleaner. If you have the same form twice on a page, you're going to get duplicate results. Kind of makes sense. It's going to process data coming in twice. Now, we've got the form here. We have our test tab. I want to show you the results tab is blank because we haven't submitted anything. If I go into test and hit send, it just caught that piece of data. I'm going to click back, submission, and we've got one record. If we go to download, I'm going to do a quick download just to make you even feel more comfortable. So HTML table, check, get this data. It's only for this submission, only for this node. This really breaks down how an event registration system would work. You'd have a content type called event, and then you'd add a web form field to it. You attach your registration form to every event. And when people hit register, you're getting individual spreadsheets for each event. And you're looking at only registrants for that single event. You can send out custom emails based on that. And what's nice is you can go up to the main registration form and look at all registrations across all events. That's pretty much web form nodes. It's a pretty simple concept once you get the key, this relationship that's being built. It's called a source entity when you start looking at the documentation, like documentation or just even navigating through config. The source of the submission, where is it coming from? And it can be any entity on your site, but nodes have this more advanced integration. So how can you extend the web form module? Now we're getting into, we've built this great forms, we need additional behavior. Well, there are add-ons for that. And add-ons are Drupal modules and projects that extend and provide additional functionality to the web form module in Drupal's form API. And there are a lot of useful add-ons available and more to come. And this is the UI in the module. There's a dedicated add-ons page. If you're an administrator, you can get right to it and see it. This data is also available on Drupal.org. And just this is a quick breakdown of the add-ons. I'm only going to call out the big ones that I would say I use continuously. Spam protection is a must. Integrations is pretty common. If you're using MailChimp and you're going to want to integrate with MailChimp. If you're doing it, if you want to attach files to emails, you're going to have to use a mail module like the mail handler, mail system. You could use SMTP. And then there's some utilities that are helpful. I'm going to call out a few. I'm going to keep going. So this is spam protection. I think so. Spam would be the word I've mentioned 4 times in this presentation because it's really important. So honeypot and capture, strongly recommended. I really like the client-side validation module because you turn it on and it does what it says. It adds full client-side validation to all your forms on your site. Very clean and simple. So some add-ons to just improve the site builder experience. I didn't mention IMC, but if you want to upload files like to your emails or you want to insert files into your forms, if you're using the image select, you really want to use the IMC to get those files onto your server. The web forms views and the analysis module are just great add-ons if you need advanced reporting. Web form views just allows you to create custom tables, and analysis will do the pie charts of the data coming in, and you can really help people analyze that data and look at it. So for developer experience, there is a web form migrate module. People should get more involved with it. Composite tools is a way to build reusable composite elements so that you can keep using them on multiple forms. And the mail log, mail developers, this is the only developer module I really am calling out because it will log all your emails, and if you're testing forms, it's really useful because you're not spamming people. So this is I got to pause here and be like, this kind of has how I feel about the web form module, Drupal, and where I'm going with things is, so the web form module without Drupal's ecosystem is just another form builder. Yes, it's trying to be a powerful enterprise level form builder, but there's a lot of them on the market. And the web form module with Drupal's contributed modules and themes, it's an entirely different ball game. Like we enter into this realm of anything's possible, but more importantly, when you start, if you're a developer and you come into this module, you can tweak it any way you want and handle any requirement thrown at you by a client. I do it all the time. It's kind of one of the great joys I get from this module is people throw crazy requirements. I'm like, all right. Sometimes you have to write a little code, but usually you just have to kind of tweak little things. And this all comes down to the Drupal community. The Drupal community's ability to provide contributor modules and core, which is, the Webform module extends something called Form API. It's the real power behind the Webform module. And, I got to call out the Drupal community. This is Drupal. This is what we're really talking about. It's not the software, it's the people involved. And I've made this pitch over some time. This is the pitch I'm even going to do at DrupalCon. Not should, but how can you contribute? And I think this is a really important thing people need to understand is it's open source. It's free. It only exists because people contribute their time to help build it, and companies do too. And how can you contribute to the Webform module in Drupal? Well, there's the contribute section for that. And this is a section, contribute section, encourages people to join the Drupal community, become a member of the Drupal Association, and contribute to Drupal. And this is the contribute section. I added it to the Webform module. There's some other stories behind this, but the idea is just to give you a starting point, to understand, in my mind, these are the 3 things you need to kind of pay attention to. And I'm even going to just demo it because I'll do it for myself. So if I go back up, I go to contribute. So it's just encouraging you to create a Drupal.org account. Everyone should have a .org account. And I can enter mine. And it'll fill it out. And it just starts to recognize things that you've done. Everyone should be a member of the Drupal Association. You can even clear this. There's links right here to help get you started, to support the work. And then also just getting involved and making contributions. It just reads your profile and sees that you've had some commits to the Drupal community and you've listed stuff in your contribution area. And there's more information here about the community, the Drupal Association, and I hope you get involved. That's pretty much what I'm pausing to tell you about. So yeah, I've really fixated on this. This is a thing I feel strongly about. Everyone should join the Drupal Association. I have no direct relationship. I get nothing from someone joining the Drupal Association other than, you know what, the truth is I do get something. They support the entire infrastructure the Webform module is built on. And I think when people are members of the Drupal Association, it just shows that they understand a little bit more of how this system works. It's $15 a year for individuals, $200 for an organization, which seems like nothing to me. So we're winding down. Where can you get help and learn more? There's more information about that. Well, you can connect with me. I have a blog, jrockwitz.com. You can find me on Drupal.org and Twitter. I'll basically I tweet my blog posts. With the Webform module, there is a documentation section with a cookbook and screencasts available. The Drupal Answers on Stack Exchange is huge if you want help with general issues, and the Webform module issue queue if you find a bug. And I want to call out things in the Drupal community. The Drupal Association, Drupal Planner is a great way to know what's going on in blogs, and there is a newsletter also available. And are we done yet? Yes. Ralph says yes. Obviously, we can't do any questions. I hope you might attend one of my sessions upcoming at, let's see, I'm speaking in Boston, DrupalCon, Drupadelphia, and hopefully in the New York Drupal camp that'll happen soon. I hope you had a good time watching this very long presentation and got something out of it. Thanks again.